Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast, where we comically and literally look at comics. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan. I love comic books, but my co-host loves regular books, so I make him read comic books, and then we do the aforementioned reviewing. And speaking of my aforementioned nuclear co-host, it's Jamie.
Am I nuclear?
This week, yeah?
This week I am.
This week. So,
okay, I'll go with nuclear.
I've got a way to start. So international arms races, unelected individuals forcing their will on the masses, and the constant threat of mass extinction. But enough about the bloody news. Let's talk about the comic, eh?
Wee, America's gonna implode. Wee.
But let's talk about the comic now.
Yeah. Well, America implodes.
I think there's going to be a lot of cross-referencing with real life in this comic.
This one is unfortunately quite prescient to what's going on in the world right now, isn't it?
Yeah, but we're going to get into it, and we are, of course, reviewing the Power Fantasy. It's our one for us as opposed to one for them kind of thing.
Yep.
Basically, I've subjected Jamie to a bunch of superhero shenanigans, for lack of a better term, at varying quality, shall we say.
Oh, it's been a rough ride, hasn't it?
Yeah, for the past couple of weeks. So this is the cut. I need to give you a little bit of it's fine. Here's some good stuff. Here's some good stuff. It's all right. And then get you on the bollocks next week.
What did you think of it then?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It's dense. It's rich. There's a lot of on the nose metaphors and beyond metaphors. Just what's the opposite of a metaphor? Just it is the thing it's saying. It is there's a lot of that.
There's a lot of art imitating life here.
Yes, but I was fascinated by it. Very page turning. I got through it even though it's very dense. I got through it very quickly because I was just fascinated by it and the characters.
Yeah, I liked it. I don't think I liked it as much as you did, but I liked it.
This going to make for an interesting... I wonder if by the end you're going to be actually, I love it now. Is it going to be one of those episodes?
Or maybe it'll be like Spider-Man where you're actually, this is garbage.
Maybe.
It's gone both ways.
It has. I'm feeling pretty strong on this one.
To be honest with you, I don't really have anything negative to say.
Well, that's good. I think we're going to debate whether the stuff is good, great, or fine. I think it's going to fall within those kind of parameters. But I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. As I said, the Power Fantasy is a Image comic, so normally in for at least an interesting time, if not a good time, with the Image comics. And with the credits, a couple of interesting ones. The writer Kieron Gillen. Now, does that name ring any bells for you at all?
No, but it did, but I couldn't tell where from.
That's interesting. So, they've done a lot of great stuff. He's British, right? It's actually a British writer and British artist on here. So God save our gracious king. I'm still not over it.
Oh, mate, you got the wrong monarch.
I know.
In times gone by, that would have got you hanged.
Well, don't tell. Keep it between us. Don't tell anyone, and we'll just pretend like it never happened.
Don't tell olds.
Don't tell
Sausage Fingers the Third.
Don't tell him, or he'll die enemy. Anyway,
that's why I don't drive through any tunnels in France, mate.
That's why I don't. That's why I don't race with the paparazzi. I don't know. We'll leave that on or not. We'll see. I'll see how I feel in the edit. But Kieron Gillen, writer, done a lot of good stuff that I've really enjoyed. The one that you will know more specifically is he did the 2017 Darth Vader comic for Marvel,
which I really liked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's also done a bunch of Image stuff and a bunch of Marvel stuff. He continued on the X-Men post Hickman, and I think while it wasn't Hickman specifically, I think he did a really good job of kind of carrying the torch after him. But he also did a comic that I really enjoyed called Die, which is a Dungeons and Dragons-esque role-playing game where people get sucked into the game, Jumanji style, but with Dungeons and Dragons.
We've been meaning to do that one for years, haven't we?
Yeah, and the problem is, this, it's a dense one. Kieron, from the stuff I read of his, he can do the Marvel-esque, I can see good Marvel stuff. He can do that, but that's several layers down in complexity to his individual work.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote the shit out of Vader. Because that was the Vader one where he was sort of underpowered, vying for position. It was that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was other people coming into the fray, and he recruits that Dr. Afro, became a prominent Star Wars character in the outside the film stuff. Really good stuff. Really good. But I read some of his, he does a lot of writing, as in just addressing the readers in these issues. Yes. And I only read a couple because they're quite long as well. And I was I just want to get to the story because I'm really enjoying the story.
I tried one and realised it was superfluous.
Yes, but I read a bit of his stuff and what he was addressing to the reader. One pointed out was when he finished Die, he was like, I should probably take a bit away and like not do something this heavy again for a little bit, like give myself a break. And it's like his version of break was, right, you're taking on the X-Men Krakoa era, which is just Hickman's now leaving, so you got to take that on, and you got and a bunch of other stuff as well. So his version of a holiday was, well, I'll just write like some really good Marvel stuff and like some like little bits for Image and stuff, like, and then he was like, right, holiday's over, back to the really complex highbrow stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, to say the least. We've also got an artist by the name of Caspar Wijngaard, who I've seen a bit of stuff from. And again, like going by the art of this alone, I think I'm a big fan of that as well.
Yeah.
And I think those are the main credits. I mean, those are the main ones on the Image website. So I'm going by those at the very least.
Yeah.
So starting with the arting, what was your initial thoughts on the visuals?
Double thumbs up.
Fantastic.
It looks really good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think there's a big cast of characters here, and he's done a really good job of making them all very distinct. A lot of them recognizable by silhouette, particularly Etienne.
Yes. I was going to ask, is that pronunciation? I've never seen that name before.
Me neither, so we're going to go with Etienne.
Okay.
Like, that's just, I'm making a ruling.
Yes.
As with a lot of these names, first person to say it gets to define how we pronounce it on the podcast.
We're right until we're proven wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought Etienne's character model was particularly good. I really got a sense of how he aged and how the kind of boy that we saw aged into the man that he is. On a visual level, I really liked just how well he nailed certain like very human characteristics of aging.
I tell you what we should have done, I think, before arting, because I think this is kind of very important to everything we're going to talk about. Do you want to attempt to give us a kind of overall arching thing of what the story is?
Yes.
Or even just what the setting is. Like, not even the story, but what is the world that we're kind of entering here?
So, think the Umbrella Academy. There pops up during the early nuclear age, so starting in the 1940s, the dropping of the first bombs prompted a subset of humans to get these powers. They call them the atomics. They kind of exist as a quasi-governmental nuclear deterrent in some instances. Sometimes they operate a bit more autonomously, but essentially we have a class of really powerful superheroes who are trying to navigate a world in which at some point in the late 1980s, Europe was destroyed with a nuclear weapon. I
think superheroes might be even like too specific a term for this, but I totally see why you've used it, because that's what we're used to when we get big personalities with powers.
They're all like Superman level superheroes though. We're not talking like
I'd even go as far as to say like even like Dr. Manhattan, like that kind of level.
Yeah, well, Dr. Manhattan's kind of a natural extension of Superman, isn't he? But they're very highly powered superheroes, and some of them have formed a loose kind of coalition and group. Some of them exist outside of that. Largely, they're all quite human and trying to just do their thing and get through life. But the way that they have to interface with this world that has never really moved past the Cold War. We're presented with a version of Earth here that's still very obsessed with nuclear power and the idea of a deterrent and the idea of mutually assured destruction. And I think this whole comic book is quite an elegant rumination on the idea of mutually assured destruction, which we have been hearing about less and less into the 21st century. I think, obviously, in the 1980s, mutually assured destruction, East and West, Russia, America, was a really hot topic because they were flirting with the idea of nuking each other for the whole decade. Whereas, actually, it's become a less relevant idea in our modern age, because I think we now understand that a nuke dropping is only the start of it, potentially in a world war now. I think everyone has just gotten so used to the idea that it's just not discussed because it's just assumed. Like it's everyone's kind of, and by everyone I mean like even like world leaders and everyone has just kind of taken on as something you don't even need to think about. You're just like, well, of course we're not going to nuke them. Like they'll nuke us. Like it's not even, you don't even have to say like,
You don't even have to use the phrase mutually assured destruction. It's like, well, yeah, of course, we're Russia, America, China, like nothing's, it's all Cold War shit with them. It's all economic, it's all, sanctions, and it's all like underhanded stuff because they can't do anything else.
Yeah. Whereas this world, they're still quite focused on that. I think that's an elegant enough description of the story without getting too far into it.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would bring up, and this isn't even necessarily to correct you, but I think it's more of where we are in the story as we come into it.
Yeah,
I think we're past the point that humanity as a whole is like even worrying about deterrence, if that makes sense. I think that these superpowered individuals are already in power. Yeah. They're just trying to see if they can do anything to tip the scales back in their favor. Yeah. I don't think it's even so much as like, we won't do anything if you do anything. I think they're like, we're not doing anything. And like secretly doing stuff behind the scenes. Yeah. Like, maybe this will work. And we'll get into the story. Doesn't necessarily work out how they would like to. But what I mean is I think the superpowered individuals are already the superpowers. Yeah. I mean, there's a bit right at the beginning of one of the issues, I think it's one, where they do, I think it's a really nice way to tie it all in, where they just have, they put the three definitions of the word superpower.
Yeah.
So superpower meaning abilities of a person, like considered maybe a superhero. And there's world powers, and then it's the armament, like nuclear armaments.
Yeah.
And I think those three definitions are like what this whole comic is about.
Yeah.
It's those three equal definitions to the same word.
It's a rumination on what the world would have looked like post-war had we had superpowered individuals, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But I think here, the superpowered individuals are already the superpowers.
Yeah.
And I think, like in this one, America especially, who we're looking into the most in this comic, they're the ones who are like, I think we can get back up there. I think we can get up there, like be the top dogs again. And the superpowers are just like, absolutely fucking not.
Yeah, we don't trust you.
Yeah. So back to the art. I think the reason I think that was important was the whole seriousness of like the story and the subjects they're covering. I think it juxtaposes really, really well with the vibrant colors we're getting here.
Yeah.
How many times have we had comics where it's like it's a dark subject matter and it's like a grayish, brownish color scheme all the way through. And you just like, I get it. Like you're matching the tone. So fair enough. But I really love that this one is just really vibrant colors. Like the first scene that we come on is yellow everywhere. And it's the summer like of 60s. And it's like that kind of like visual feeling.
The first summer of love.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it looks good. Everything's where it should be. Everything is where it should be really consistently, actually. And it's been a bit of a breath of fresh air going back to Image stuff, because now I recognise, having taken a bit of time away from the sort of more arty graphic novel world, is that the quality, one of the things that I've always liked about it is that the quality of art is a lot higher.
Oh, yeah.
Than the big two. And I think that's really evident here. And it definitely, I think this comic really made me realise the extent to which art props up a story, because the fact that it looked good kept me invested. And I know that you're not a particularly art-focused comic book reader, but you have to admit that actually the art being good, and even just the basics being right, in terms of anatomy and posing and the character design being there and the backdrops looking nice, makes a comic book more presentable.
See, it's hard to judge on this one purely because I think the art is the level as you're describing it. Like it's a real eye-catching, engaging element. But also the story, the first line, to not jump too far into story, but just for this specific argument, the first line is basically like, yeah, we should take over the world. So it's hard to decide like what's catching me more. Like obviously the visuals are the first thing you see, but also with an opening line like that, like the story and the writing and the art are so good equally.
But that's the opening line. Anything can open with a bang.
Yes.
What I mean is that actually, having spent a bit of time with some Big Two stuff, and again, there are pockets of really good, interesting art happening in the Big Two. Maybe more Marvel, if I'm being entirely honest.
Yeah.
But the fact that this comic book looks good and looks presentable really helps for me. And I'm starting to realise just how important the art is. If anything, I think it's more important. I think it's the most important element in a comic book. And you are right, the story is engaging here and it's interesting, and there's quite a lot of depth to it. But actually, if it looked like shit, I just wouldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
But then we rarely get terrible art. I know you can be very critical of art a lot, but I don't think that's not as much an objective thing as more like you wanting the best all the time, which I think is everyone should strive for. But what I mean is we normally get a lot of mid art. Do you know what I mean? I think it's rare that we get like bad, but I think we get a lot of boring.
But this is in a printed media, and I think printed media has to be more selective now, because printed media is constantly competing with digital media now. In the open marketplace that is your eyeballs, printed media is competing with digital media, which has an inherent advantage in that once the initial production costs are done, they can sell it to you for a fixed price into perpetuity with no further costs, essentially.
Yeah.
Other than maintaining an online platform, which is probably quite expensive, but pennies on the pound in compared to printing things.
Yes.
And actually making a physical product. And so in a world where physical medium like books and records and comic books are competing with their digital counterparts, I think it's really important that the finished product looks beautiful. And so for me, when I see a printed comic book that falls short in that area, I'm like, this is an unsuccessful thing for me.
Yeah.
Because actually it's fallen short in the one way that it has it's fallen short in a critical way, which is that it's not beautiful.
Would it be fair to kind of summarize your point? I think I'm going to get this correct, in that you look at it, if the art isn't like really good or great, you look to like, you had two jobs, writing and art, and you've obviously not done very well in half of your goals.
Yeah.
Here. I think, is that where you're coming
from? But also, because it's a printed medium and it's expensive to produce,
yeah,
only the very best should be allowed to filter through. We shouldn't be getting comic books of trash art now, because actually, paper is expensive these days. Printing costs are expensive. The fuel to transport this shit around is expensive. And so when I see comic books with hideous art, I'm like, why the fuck have you bothered? Why the fuck have you bothered to put all of that effort into something that ultimately doesn't look good in a visual medium? And so I see something like this and I'm like, this is how it should be. This should be the standard for comic books. They should all look this good, because they've not done anything massive. They've not taken any huge risks with the art. The art, it's not one of those comic books that we're looking at and going, wow, this was an artist's first project. That Doctor Doom comic we read.
Yes.
Where it's sort of like, well, the art is so central to this experience. This was an artist's opportunity to get a writer to string together some sentences so that they could display this beautiful piece of art. This is a comic book that is predominantly plot and predominantly story. Well, less plot, more story. But the art looks good. And that is exactly like, it's not, they're not taking any big risks. They're not making anything like achingly, stunningly beautiful here. But it looks good, and that should be the baseline.
Yeah, it's not quite as far as, like, say, that Silver Surfer Black, which was, like, very avant-garde, very psychedelic. Like, this is high-quality, good storytelling art.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I just feel that a lot of the time people aren't nailing the basics. And this really nails the basics. Everything's in proportion. Everything looks good. Characters are all visually interesting. I can, for the most part, tell what's going on. And that is all in service of the story that is quite interesting.
For me, I think I would rank this as one of those comics for me that reignites my kind of passion for the medium. We do read a lot of slop and a lot of super shenanigans. And like, me, when I'm reviewing something that even if I just like it, like not even love, but like, I'm like, well, I like this, and this, like I'm picking out. This one, like, and even just speaking specifically to the art, like you say, it kind of reinvigorates you, kind of like, oh, this is how good it should be, or it could be all the time, and this is the bar that everything else should measure up to. Yeah,
absolutely. And if you think about it, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because we talk about superhero shenanigans and we talk about the sort of institution of superhero comics in the big two a lot. But if you think about it, back in there, not back in our day, back before we were but a sparkle in our father's eyes, the superhero comics were a new entrant, an exciting, interesting entrant into a market that was lousy with cowboy stories.
War stories and
horror
schlop.
Can you remember when we read Action Comics 38? and Adventure Comics 1, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
First appearance of Superman and Batman.
Yes.
And there was essentially these 2 short superhero stories in amongst a bunch of war stories and cowboy stories or whatever. And so there's always been a comic book climate. There's always been like a predominant focus of the medium, right? Even back then, even when comic books were relatively new, there's always been this sort of, there's a lot of this, but then there's a little bit of this. And what we're seeing now with the Image stuff is what the superhero stuff was 70 years ago. It's
the counterculture almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, the cowboy stories and the war stories were taking these big cultural moments and distilling them down into action entertainment. And then the superhero stories had something really interesting to say. Whereas now, for the most part, the superhero stories don't have a lot to say a lot of the time.
They've become that we need to play it safe to maximize profits.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas stuff like this, that weirdly feels a bit more grounded even. I mean, I know this is fantastical and there's a lot of talk about magic and the mystical and shit like that.
But it's the vehicle for the metaphor.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's but the vehicle for the metaphor, and actually it feels more grounded than even a low-level superhero story does now. Yep. Even your Spider-Man, he's like, I'm going through the 4th dimension. It's like he's meant to be like grand-level hero fighting thugs in New York, right? And he's falling through dimensions with wizard dude.
Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange. You knew who I meant by click, click, click,
wizard. It took me a little bit, though.
Whereas here, even though there's some fantastical elements, actually the main bulk of the story is quite a hard-hitting commentary on power.
I think the reason it kind of enlightens a little bit why we use the word shenanigans is because it inherently implies that it's just crazy stuff happening for the sake of crazy stuff. So this I would never describe as shenanigans because it's all very... We use this to tell this. Like, it's very direct, it's very intentional. Super shenanigans, like you say, it's like, he's fallen into another dimension, now he's got to fight the monsters this week. Like, that's shenanigan-y.
The comparison that I would draw is that this...
I've got an interesting comparison, I want to hear yours first, though.
It reminds me more of high fantasy.
Yeah.
Where, I mean... the Lord of the Rings, there and back again.
It's a very world-building story.
Yes.
It's more about the world and the setting, and like the characters in it. It's not so much watching their character arcs, like traditional, even like modern media. A lot of stuff is like, how does this character change? This is like chess pieces on a board.
Well, yes, exactly that. But I think when stories are operating at their highest, and when modern story is the most interesting. And to be honest with you, I think this ties in with classical stuff as well, because when you look at old myths and old stories and old sort of proto-religious texts, when they're at the most interesting, they have something concise to say about the world. And actually, The Lord of the Rings is a really great example, I think, because Lord of the Rings was about character arcs, and it was about Frodo's journey, and it was about the Fellowship, but it was also about rebuilding Britain after World War II.
So when I said about like chess pieces, like that was more specific to this. Like, but then what's so good about Lord of the Rings? It does both the character arcs and the big world.
It serves both. It serves both masters, and actually, it's very pointedly about. Well, not. It is about rebuilding the world after World War II, and it's about the desolation that Tolkien saw during the war, and the degradation of society that he saw during the war, and actually. It's about it was him trying to create a modern myth of Britishness, and by taking the hobbits in the Shire, rural England, and talking about how special that was, and creating characters out of that, and then putting them in really difficult situations. I think he did a beautiful job of that. And this, to a lesser degree, I would argue, but nothing's as good as
it's not Tolkien,
but nothing's as good as Lord of the Rings. It's doing a really good job of taking quite human-feeling characters and then extrapolating out what their personalities would become and what the challenges in their life would become if you made them superpowered. And that's what's interesting about it to me. It's, the Japanese artist girl.
Who did X-Men?
No, in this.
Oh, in this, yes. I did have a name here somewhere. I tried to take their names. Yes, Masumi, yeah.
Masumi. Like... The conversation that's happening with all of the other characters around Masumi is that we have to placate her because she is an actual bomb that can go off and she has no control over that.
By the way, technically, we're still starting with the arting.
To be honest with you, I like the podcast when it becomes more of a conversation between us and less structured.
True. I still like to put time codes in so people can be like, here's what we're talking about this.
And I don't know, because I think, again, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and my favourite ones are the ones where it is just a conversation.
All right.
And I think those should be the dizzying heights we aim for. And then if we need the structure, we kind of, tack it in.
Well, I've only got like the littlest bits of art still to say, and then we'll resume talking about Masumi and go on story-wise from there.
Okay.
It's only because I want to point out the one thing I thought was interesting with this art-wise compared to not even just big two Marvel, but even like some of the other indie stuff. That's a loose term to use for this, but like the splash panels, normally when art is this good, like remember 8 Billion Genies, great art. They loved showing how good the art was.
Yeah.
Like, and to their credit, like they should, like it was great art. This has really great art, but I think they sparingly used the splash page to show it.
It's really understated, isn't it?
Yes, and only when the splash page is required, like it's a very significant thing either happening now or in the past that they go, let's denote an entire page to it. Yeah. Specifically, the ones I made note of was the character Heavy when he's getting shot with a laser.
Yeah.
The creep that there's a splash page of what happened in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And we still don't really, we can infer a lot of stuff because
we don't know what happened in Tokyo.
But we just get this one splash page of something happening. It's like, that looks crazy. It's like a Godzilla monster's attacking or something. But so I appreciate like they knew they had really good art because I looked up the artist and when I looked them up, they described themselves as just a visual artist, not a comic book artist, not even a graphic novel artist or anything like that. So I think it says something that they're more like, I just want good art per panel, like
that
per
tracks,
page.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
The one panel that I really liked was the one of the girl dancing naked in '69 just before they bombed out that entire city to try and kill her.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool, and I thought that was a nice juxtaposition between. Because we look back at the 60s, right? With this real rose-tinted...
Summer of Love.
It was hippies, Summer of Love, and Flower Power. We forget that the hippies and the Summer of Love thing was a distinctly middle-class subculture that happened with young middle-class kids, often from the suburbs, whose parents had made a lot of wealth in the 1950s, so that they could spend a decade slacking off.
Yeah.
They had mummy and daddy's money, and they were just mooching off their parents, mooching off their family wealth, smoking a bit of draw, living the life of it. Whereas the actual late 1960s for most working Americans was fucking hell. There was nurses being murdered in Chicago. The civil rights movement was getting absolutely trampled on by the American establishment. Jack Kennedy and then his brother Bob Kennedy both got assassinated. Martin King got assassinated. Like all of their leaders and anybody who stood for anything got fucking shot. And then when we think back to the 60s, it's all long hair, round sunglasses, and flower crowns. Yeah. And I thought that was
the music of the era. Like that's what people think when people say 60s, you just think music.
But even then, really, you're thinking of the last 3 Beatles albums.
Yes.
You're not even thinking of the whole climate of music in the 60s. You're thinking psychedelics. You're thinking the Beatles, that one album by the Surf Guys. What was that called? Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
Yes.
You're thinking like Exile on 48th Street by the Rolling Stones. You're not thinking about a whole lot of music. You're thinking about maybe a little bit of stuff by the Velvet Underground.
I mean, the most impactful stuff gets whittled down in the same way. Like, name a playwright from the whatever century that's not Shakespeare. Like, it's that, isn't it?
John Fletcher.
Sorry, should have specified normal people.
but I thought that one panel was a really nice representation of what the 60s actually was.
And then juxtaposed with the next panel, or like not the very you know what I mean, when the bomb goes off.
Well, yeah, but that's the 60s, isn't it? The 60s is hippies, but really they're protesting Vietnam, right? That's what the 60s actually were in America, and I thought those two panels did a really good job of displaying that visually without rolling it up in a piece of paper and ramming it down your throat.
A lot of great visual storytelling in this, a lot of subtle stuff. Like there's one specifically that I made a note of that was someone talking about the Tokyo incident with Masumi, and as they're talking about it, there's just a really faint, evil-looking face in the background, and I was like, if that was not so faint because I had to look, be like, is that something? And I almost like had to like tilt it and be like, yeah, that's a face.
Yeah.
It's subtle enough that I think it's good, because if it was more obvious, it would have been like more obvious, visual storytelling. The fact that they made it faint was like, if you see it, you almost feel a bit like, oh, I've seen a little bit of information there to visually told. It's not like a line of text that's like really small. It's a background thing. It's stuff like that which I appreciate, because then you go, ooh, what else am I missing? And it makes you pay closer attention from that point onwards.
Yeah.
So a lot of great visual storytelling, I thought there. Shall we now officially go into story? We'll go back to talking about Masumi, because
so Masumi,
I think we should probably talk about each character a bit, because I think each character is almost like such each of the 6 characters is like a sixth of the story.
Well, in which case we should probably start with Etienne then.
Well, we could go with Masumi, because I think we can talk about them in any order, because I think they kind of just interact with each other.
Yeah.
Masumi, we should start off by saying I think she's one of the lesser appearing characters at this stage.
She's also one of the younger ones, isn't she?
Yes, but for very important reasons.
Yeah. So she's very powerful, I think is the implication we get. And the other 5 are kind of always trying to placate Masumi. So Etienne, there's a fun moment where Etienne is wanted by the Americans for doing quite a lot of murder. But he still has to risk and, manage the risks of getting on a plane and flying to Japan to go to Masumi's art show, because he don't want to piss Masumi off.
Yes, and what's especially interesting is it's established very early on how powerful Etienne is, and then that inherently tells you how important the other 5 main characters are.
Because he's one of the least powerful, really.
Well, we don't know. I think that's where we get on the level of, again, mutually assured destruction.
Did you see because they gave them power rankings. Did you see them?
Yeah, but those were all based. So there was a page, I love those, the epistolary page things of like information. Very
that's not
Hickman-esque.
epistolary.
Sorry.
Because it's outside of the story.
Right. So added information between the pages.
It's very comic booky.
Yes. It's very Hickman-esque, because he does that a lot.
I don't think there's a corollary for it in traditional literature.
Well, we should invent one. Should we name it right now?
Yeah, what do you want to call it? I'm historically bad at naming things.
A Hickman.
So there's a Hickman page.
Yes. But what's interesting is, very Hickman-esque. It's not just, here's some information about the universe. Like Chew did when it's just like, here's some information. I was like, cheers. This is information from Magus's group, the Pyramids. So all the information is relative to what
Are we talking about the same page? It's a black page with all their faces on it.
So if you read it, it's from the perspective of someone using Magus information. So because they talk about an angelic and demonic characters, but they say specifically this is not the people within the pyramid or something like that. I'm ad-libbing from memory, but something along the lines of we in the pyramid know it's not the Christian heaven and hell as people know, but these are the closest words we have for where they're from, kind of thing.
But it basically gives you how many people they think they could kill per hour, and Etienne's is one of the lowest.
Yeah, but again, that is based on we reference this specific incident where it happened, and also that page, the amount of slow story building they're doing, where it's we base this information on this incident, and you're like, is this an incident we've seen yet or not?
Nope.
Exactly. Some you have and some you haven't, which I think is the best mix, because then you're like, oh, we're gonna find out about this thing. Yeah, we're gonna see it.
Masumi. She's essentially just an atom bomb, isn't she? Waiting to go off.
We haven't seen it properly yet. Again, apart from that one splash panel, and you still don't really know what it is that's happening. You just get a vibe of what's going on. She kind of, as best I inferred, a Godzilla waiting to happen, basically. Yeah. But it's not even because you immediately think, I would at least, that she transforms into a monster.
Yeah.
But we see she starts to get a little frayed, a little unhinged. And it's just somewhere in the ocean, somewhere something starts rising. Yeah. So it's not even that she turns into it, would normally be the case with
summons a kaiju.
Exactly. But it's beyond her control, but it's linked to her emotion or her mental state.
And I'm generally up for some kaiju stuff.
Yeah.
I like a kaiju.
And again, how powerful we know the other characters are, they are all worried about her doing this thing.
Yeah.
And we are shown very early on how powerful characters are. I think we'll talk about Etienne next, because he's kind of the starter. But seeing what Etienne does at the beginning, and then for him to be like, better not piss her off. You're like, how powerful is she? Like, and we, again, like you said, we don't, one has been responsible for more deaths than others, but we still don't know. They haven't fought, so we don't really know.
Yeah. So the most we see of her is at her art show.
Yes.
And I thought that was a fun scene. She essentially throws an art show because she's trying to create art that shows what it feels like when she kaiju's out, I think.
Yeah.
And an art critic turns up. Well, an art critic doesn't turn up.
No, they turn up. And then
having already written a review before seeing the preview.
I think her thing showed the critics at the art show, and then her review is posted almost immediately.
Yeah.
And Masumi's immediately like, you did not have time to look at that and write it, and you weren't at the preview, so you wrote it before you ever saw anything.
And it turns out she's just being nice because she's scared of her, and then she asks for her actual opinion. Turns out it's Etienne's words in the critic's mouth.
But the opinion is exactly what Masumi wants to hear, which is not overly complimentary, but it's at least understanding of where she's coming from.
Yeah.
So the fact the
art critic said, how good a painter would Hitler have had to have been for us to forgive the Holocaust?
Yeah.
Which is dark.
Sounds...
there is a point. Unfortunately, the amount of noncery that we have seen in the music industry of late.
And some people just get forgiven because they're the best of the whatever genre.
Right?
Yep.
So there is a certain point
it's a Jim Jeffries bit about like, how talented do I have to be?
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
But there is a certain point where we will forgive people pretty shit, like on a cultural level. There's individuals who are like, I will never listen to this person again because they have said this. And it's like, okay, that's your moral code. Go for that.
But also, genocide's a whole nother kettle of fish, isn't it? Like...
But how
the point still stands.
How hard would Hitler's first album had to have slapped is the question. Because culturally speaking, apparently there is a point.
I think it's one of those like infinite monkeys, infinite typewriters kind of thing. Like how good a piece of work of art could someone theoretically do, but versus how heinous crimes could they commit and be forgiven for?
Yeah, totally.
But especially, like I say, the art reviewer doesn't just over complimentary just go, oh, it's all great, like you're a fantastic artist. They specifically say, I get that you're trying to get across this sentiment about how you feel being this dangerous person around innocent people kind of thing and getting across that anxiety. And Masumi's like, that's all I wanted to hear. She didn't need bullshit flowery you're the best. She just needed to be seen and understood. I think, and then the reveal, as you say, of Etienne, like, I made her say that. Like, he says to someone else later, and you go, ooh, and that's how deep it runs, this invisible cage that everyone, not just Etienne, but everyone is constructing around someone.
Well, they're all sort of, there's checks and balances in place from all the others for all the others.
Yes.
That's the thing, isn't it? I think it's a bit on the nose that the kaiju one is in Tokyo. Because, like, you'd think, right? You'd think.
That could just be, like, homage or reference, though, couldn't it?
Well, it almost certainly is. It almost certainly is. And, the sweary one happens to be British.
Yep.
Like, there's...
That's about right.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? There's little nods. Although there's no more England. There's no more Blighty.
No more tea. That's the worst part.
Well, the tea always came from China.
Yeah, no more breakfast English tea, is that the one
English
called?
Breakfast tea.
Yeah, you think
I'm not a big fan of English breakfast tea.
That's fine. But yeah, that was a good reveal of like they're talking about flying over Europe and like shedding a tear, and you're like, oh, what happened in Europe? It's like it's not what happened to Europe because Europe is gone.
There is no more Europe.
Yeah. With Masumi, I think there is a really interesting. I think all these 6 characters, they are kind of power with a human element, like a human characteristic.
Yeah.
And I like some of them are like, as we see, we'll talk later, ethics, morality, ego, I think is a big one with the heavy. I think with Masumi it is that kind of lack of control, and I think there's an allegory there with like, there's like a member of a family who's a really delicate place and everyone is kind of tiptoeing around them, not quite to the level of kaijuing out, but that idea of like, don't disrupt them, don't upset them because you don't know what they're gonna do kind of thing. And I think but also they act like almost like it's coming from a place of care and love, but we know that it's worry for the bystanders around her. So I think there's you can read a lot into like, what is this kind of meant to represent? Like how does you as the reader, like what do you get from this, the sense of this?
Yeah.
I think moving on to Etienne is probably the best place because as we find out as well, so Masumi has a girlfriend who at one point turns out her family all died in Europe.
Yeah.
That's not Masumi, though, as far as we know. So what her connection to the atomics, the superpowered people.
But Etienne goes in and does a little snip in her memory, doesn't she? And she asks the most galling question, which is, how many times have you done this? And he's like, best left unknown.
Yes. So moving on to Etienne, who I think it's hard to describe. It's hard to determine whether he's fully ethical or like a control freak, because his ethics are his own, but he talks about them as objective, doesn't he?
This is where we get into the one thing that annoyed me about this.
But is it that annoying, like, meant to be? Like, I think how you feel about his character.
Potentially it is.
By the way, for the readers, Etienne is essentially Professor X on steroids. So Professor X, big psychic, can get in people's minds.
Are we suggesting the steroids would have helped Charles walk? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think he'd have increased psychic power, specifically.
Do you think? What if we started shooting him up with roids?
Yeah, by the way, Professor X has, like, walked and lost the ability to walk, like, at least 15 times.
Well, of course he has.
Like, it's the constant, like, what if I made Charles Xavier walk? It's like, he's used to walking by now. The amount of times he's had it and lost it.
And most of his origin stories have him on 2 feet, don't they?
Oh, yeah, it's always something that happens to him.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, Xavier's a powerful psychic in the X-Men universe. Etienne is, like, times 1,000. Like, he can access anyone's mind in the entire world. He can do insane things to people literally without breaking a sweat, without stopping to drink his coffee.
Yes.
Like,
so Etienne's banging on about ethics annoyed me because it belies a massive misunderstanding of ethics.
I think what it comes down to is it's breaking down the idea of was it like greater good ethics versus morality, like individual morality. He's appearing to try to be as objective as possible. So he always talks about, we should take over the world because these countries and their nukes, that's a tentative, like,
well, he says that as a kid, doesn't he?
And in the 60s, when they're kind of early 20s, look around that age. But
they would have been early 20s because they all popped up in like 1945, didn't they?
Yeah. But yeah, he's talking about just the idea that because they have power, they should do something about it because, and he it rationalizes it, always trying to be very objective. So at one point he literally says, hey, maybe we could die. Like maybe that you could consider killing us as to be an ethically good thing to do because no one should have this much power. And I was a little confused because he's talking to another character, Valentina, who we'll get into, but she's just like, all right, yeah, I'll kill you right now then. And he's like, actually, ethically, maybe not, because if we die, you don't know who's going to come in after us and take our place.
Yeah.
And we know we're good, so ethically, we should stay alive and assume power to make sure the best possible thing happens. But it's the one thing he doesn't talk about is his own inherent lack of objectivity by being a person.
Yes.
Like, he doesn't acknowledge his own biases or anything like that.
And also, Etienne, even though he portrays himself as being the most cautious character, he's the one out there taking the biggest risks. So he kills the president.
Yeah, in like issue 1, he's having a chat with a reporter. Then another of the 6 big ones, a guy called the Heavy, turns up in his floating city as a almost kind of a fuck you to America without doing it. He's right up at the fence. He's doing the I'm not touching you thing with his city. And then America, specifically, I think it's Bush. I think it's meant to be W in this. They fire a space laser at the Heavy, try to kill him. Turns out, because they tried it before and it didn't work, the Heavy's thing is gravitational force. And he literally holds himself together.
Yeah.
A cellular level and just reforms. So after this laser hits, Etienne is like, I need to speak to him right now because if not, he's going to launch Texas into space.
Yeah.
And that's not a joke. That's not an over-exaggeration. That is like what the Heavy's considering actually doing.
And so he negotiates with the Heavy.
Yes.
And the Heavy's like, you need to kill the president. So remotely.
Well, Etienne literally offers. He's like, what do I need to do? And it's almost like underhanded code for who do I need to kill to make this right? So he's already expecting, a list of names to be killed. First one's the president. He's like, right, done. And
everyone in the war room.
Yeah. Everyone in the war room.
Everyone who knew about it. And then all of their families.
And then what's so interesting here is this is where Etienne and his kind of ethical code, maybe even might be a strong term, but he goes, I don't want to take it that far. And Heavy's like, well, if you don't, you know what I'm going to do. And I'm pissed off about this. And Etienne's like, all right, I'll do that. But I get to kill everyone in your floating city.
Everyone in your family, because that's what he calls everyone in the floating city.
And I think that's very much intentionally meant to be you feel about your family the way that these family members, the way that these people's family members feel about them.
Yeah.
And they had nothing they just were related to or in the same family as someone who knew what was going to happen. That's it.
So this is a kind of moral relativism, which goes all the way back to the Bible, because what Etienne is offering there is the eye for an eye solution.
Yep.
That's what he's offering. He's saying, okay, I've done what I believe is reasonable, but on their behalf, if I'm going to inflict that upon them, I also need to inflict it upon you in the interest of fairness.
Yeah.
Don't think fairness and ethics are the same fucking thing.
Oh, no, not at all. And I to be fair, I don't think even he as a character was talking in fairness. I think he offered these things to this other superpower because he knows he has to, or he believes he has to. Maybe those are different. He believes he has to do these things to placate this person who feels they've just been wronged and has the power to execute their revenge. Again, really coming back to the whole nuclear superpower, allegory. So he says, what do you want? And he probably already has an idea of what he wants. Does it immediately. And then as soon as it gets to a level where he feels that's gone too far, I don't think he's even offering as an eye for an eye of or in the interest of fairness, I think it's literally you feel this way about these people, but your family, and that's the same as these bystanders who you demanding to be killed as well.
Yeah, fair. I mean, do you think that was an equitable and ethical response to that situation?
Well, like I was saying before, I don't think it's about ethics. It's about ethics in the sense that Etienne, I think his whole philosophy really comes down to the trolley problem.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
No, I agree. Kill one to save the many.
Exactly. So from his perspective, he uses the very literal, I'm saving the state of Texas from being annihilated as a whole. So it's completely reasonable to kill all these people in response to that. What we don't like as the reader, which I think is the intention as well, is the ease and the speed of which he will do that.
Yes.
It's a snap of the fingers and all these people are dead.
Well, it's not even a snap of the fingers. He just gives them all a stroke.
Yes, exactly. So for that to be done so coldly, but for him to also show his working out for why it was ethical to do so, for me, what made him such a fascinating character.
Yeah.
And I get, when you say, you annoyed by him, that's totally in line with what I liked about the character as well. I think
if he had talked about his moral code and hadn't continually used the word ethics, I'd have found it less annoying. I think it's just that he kept saying, well, it's ethics. I'm like, no, it's not.
Well, it's annoying because that's him justifying doing horrible things. It's
it's a moral issue, not an ethical issue.
Yeah, and it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And you could argue that Etienne's in some ways, you could argue him as being one of the most evil characters in this thing.
Because he's so cold.
Yes. But then, if you ask him about it, he's like, well, I saved millions of lives by killing a few thousand. And that's what makes this such an engaging read overall, is it poses you with a lot of these kind of ethical, moral questions of, okay, is he still bad? Is he good? That's what makes this so fascinating, I think.
And on a governmental level, particularly in times of war, leaders make those kind of decisions all the time.
Yeah.
So you know about oh god, what's his fucking name? Enigma Code.
Alan Turing.
He's on the 10 now, isn't he? Or is he? No, he's on the 50, isn't he?
I don't see enough 50s to know, to be honest.
Yeah, I see a few because I work in hospitality. People love paying us in 50s. Oh, I've only got a 50. Can you break it down? You're buying a £3 pint.
And then next time, another 50. It's like, I know you have change. I gave
I've
it to you.
given you all of my change, sir.
What have you done with it?
Yeah. It's always my locals in the building trade who pay in 50s as well. It's hilarious. Because, they've actually got money because they work in the fucking building trade.
But don't tell the tax man.
Yeah, this is it. There's a lot of white residue on that £50 note, sir.
Don't know what that means, but
I've never seen that before. In the war, once we cracked Enigma, they had to be really careful about it actually using the information that they'd gotten.
Yeah, they had to let a bombing, at least one, maybe even a couple, happen to not show their hand that they knew they were going to happen.
Bunch of bombings, bunch of ships getting sunk. And so it was one of those things where actually I don't think they even told High Command. Every once in a while, they would just look at something and go, yep, we need to stop that one. We'll just quietly feed that information back to High Command. And so these people were on some level making the same decisions that Etienne's now making. I mean, where it's like, actually, it's within my power to stop anything happening at any time. I now have to be selective about what I do and don't let happen. And yeah, he has to make the active choice to take a small number of lives so that he can save many. And you nailed it. It's classically the trolley problem, isn't it?
I think more directly, I was more direct to the analogy. I was thinking more Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is literally explained as, we had to do that to stop even more deaths from happening.
Yeah.
But then it becomes, did you? Or is that what the person who did those things would say to justify it?
It certainly hastened the end of the war. But to be honest with you, what was happening on the Eastern Front, with the Russians rolling over to Germany was going to fall pretty fucking soon.
Yeah.
Like, the Russians had that one in the bag, really. They were rolling through Germany by that point at the end of the war. And it's interesting to see it played out, but again, it's not the first time I've had to think about those things.
Yeah.
It's not the first time I've had, I mean, to be honest with you, it's not dissimilar from the central observation of Hot Fuzz. For the greater good.
For the greater good.
For the greater good. Do you know what I mean, though? We've had a lot of art that's posed this question to us. I don't know that it's posing that question to us in a particularly unique or innovative way.
No, and I wouldn't put this on the pedestal to be like, this is what we should be referring, or like nuclear arms and ethical.
No, and I don't necessarily think what I just said is in detriment to it. I don't think that's a particularly scathing critique.
If anything, it's more of a bringing together of genres that should have been brought together. I mean, they have been brought together a lot. The idea of weapons of mass destruction and superheroes with powers.
Yeah.
Because there should be an overlap, and we know, and one of the things I was going to tentatively actually start the podcast with, and I forgot, was, would it be fair to describe this thing as Watchmen-esque?
Yeah, it is a bit, isn't it?
Because the Watchmen was probably if not the first, definitely the earliest, biggest allegory for superhero powers and nuclear arms.
And we also saw a little bit of this stuff in the Iron Man films, where, you know, the American government was, there were conversations happening, and that Tony Stark ended up in court, didn't he? Because they were like, the Iron Man suit was a weapon.
That and the arc reactor, I think, specifically.
Yeah, these things are weapons that should be in the hands of the government. And Tony Stark said, well, no, actually, I don't really trust you with it. It's mine. And again, it's that this is sort of different to that, in as much as these things aren't manufactured weapons, they are people. And so they can't just be in the hands of the American government. And in fact, when we get into Etienne's friend, I can't remember her name now,
Valentina,
there is a panel where she's with a bunch of military people and they ask her to destroy a tank.
Yeah, as a child.
Yeah,
she's like, I don't want to do this anymore.
She's like, I'm not staying with you. And then she just pops out of existence and pops up in someone's house and went, will you be my new mum?
Yeah. There's a lot of that personality attached to all of this, like, grander, you know, stories and ideas and stuff, which I think is why I enjoyed it so much. And like I say, it's not revolutionizing anything in terms of the you know, discussions about ethics and superpowers and, you know, nuclear arms and stuff. But I think it's just so fun to see it done in this way, in this fantastical world and stuff.
But it's interesting because we sort of talk about that as if it's an impossibility. But there are novels that have changed the world in that way.
Oh, yeah. What I mean is, like, with how big a superhero thing is generally, it's surprising that Watchmen seems to be the only one that again, is massively well-known that touches on those two topics together, you know?
You are right, it is a bit Watchmen-esque.
But definitely more on the nose than Watchmen. I think it's very more upfront with what it's saying, whereas Watchmen, I think, was a little more...
Alan Moore.
Yeah, a little more about it.
Yeah, it was very Alan Moore, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, in its scope, it almost kind of puts me in mind of something like The Handmaid's Tale or 1984, where actually, even though they weren't science fiction, it really showed. So they were kind of really great meditations on what ultimate state power looked like.
Yeah, authoritarianism.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is what happens if you as a people allow your state to have absolute authoritarian power over you. This is very much this is what happens when states have the power to kill en masse, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the conversation that's being had here, is actually, should we be allowing small groups of people to accrue enough power to kill en masse? I would argue no.
But then the point of this is more the inevitability of that happening.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
How to navigate past that point.
And because the structures that we live in now, I was thinking about this the other day a lot, actually, because my partner and I were in North Walsham, and we were walking around the little town of North Walsham. You've been to North Walsham, right?
I don't know.
And we stumbled upon a pub that was like community run, not for profit. And it'd been there since the 17th century. It was an old coach house, and it had been a morgue, and it had been everything. But now it's a little pub that has a coffee morning at 10. They have a coffee table at 10 every day. You can go in and you just sit down at this one big table with a bunch of strangers and sit and have coffee, right? And like, there was all these little community projects happening because it was a smaller community. And it's like, oh, we are supposed to live like this. This is about as big as a human settlement should really be. But because there's now so many of us, we've organised ourselves into much larger groups. And then the problem becomes actually to administrate a group that large, cities, countries, transcontinental governments like the EU. I would argue that America and Russia are so big, they almost kind of fall into the idea of America's actually 50 countries that has a transcontinental government, right?
You could argue that. I think Americans might take umbrage with it, but you could state that case.
I think there's a valid point for that. Is that actually America's big and diverse enough that it could be 50 countries.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of countries that just shouldn't fucking be there. Hawaii. But
you really have a bug in your bonnet about Hawaii, don't you?
Mate, Hawaiian nationalism is very important to me. And once you get into settlements and groups of people that are large enough that you then need centralized power to administrate them, well, that power centralizes, and you end up giving this small group of people enough resources to kill en masse, or to starve and deprivate their own citizens en masse, or even just to make decisions that benefit that small group at the cost of the wider population, right? Isn't this just an allegory for agrarian living? Isn't it just an allegory for not allowing power to condense in that way?
But then I think this story is more about power will amass in that way regardless, like almost like just a natural result.
And I agree with you. I think it's a necessary evil for our species being as abundant as it is.
I wouldn't even say, like, to even call it necessary evil implies that we have a choice, and it's like, well, we should do it this way because for the greater good and all that bollocks. I think it's even just, if you get humans together in any kind of way, there will be a power dynamic. Just happens because of who we are as a species.
Humans in smaller groups were always warlike.
Yeah.
But war was different.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the argument Etienne, especially, and a bunch of the other characters are making, is if we don't take power, there will be fighting.
Yeah.
And fight, because what they specifically say in regards to the most powerful individuals, the six, the reason I think they refer to as mutually assured destruction, because they talk about who could kill the other one, right? So there is an idea of, I could be stopped by them. I could be stopped in my plans or killed by them.
And most of them know that Etienne could do what he needed to do against any of them, really.
But what's interesting, I think, is it's not so much that as much as it's how much damage and deaths to bystanders would happen if we fought. I think there is, because I don't think any of them inherently won. I think they all think of themselves as good.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. Again, allegory for superpower countries.
Yes.
So I think they're very much like, if we fight, we're going to do a lot of damage. We're going to take a lot of people out with me. Like, even for Etienne, he killed a bunch of people, but he deemed it necessary because of the situation. Even someone like the Heavy wanted a lot of people dead, thinking it would happen. But even he had this idea of, like, I'm killing these people because of this, or because of this thing that they're related to.
And I think it's even more applicable given that the global superpowers that we have, or at least we've historically had for the past 100 years, operate on this strong ideological core. So we've been fed this rhetoric of East versus West, capitalism versus communism, right? Even though there's not been a big communist global power for like 30, 33, 34 years now.
Not a real one.
No. I mean, the Soviet Union fell in 1999.
I'm thinking more like China. Like, it says communism in the name, but it's not.
Well, yeah. I mean, the communist state of China fell, didn't it?
But they call it's still the CCP, isn't it? Is it communism? Yeah, the CCP party, yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah, you are right.
But it says communist as something. It's communist as America, pretty much at this point,
much. Yeah. All like when you've got powers, superpowers, global superpowers, countries that are also trying to profligate their ideology around the world, that is inherently quite scary.
Yeah, and
it's inherently very scary.
It's why I think this is so engaging, because these individuals doing what they're doing, it does ring true of that. We kind of live in that already, like in a just less obvious way. We don't have individual superpowered beings to point out and go, that's what they're doing. We have governments. We'd be like, well, they're kind of doing this, but there's like even arms of the government, they are disagreeing. And, it's a lot more gray, whereas this, in terms of just who is doing what, is black and white.
But this is also kind of only one abstraction away from what we actually have.
Yeah.
Because we do exist in a world that has really powerful oligarchs. That's a term that's being used a lot more at the moment because of one particular very powerful oligarch. But
Dave Matthews.
The Dave Matthews Project, man, is everywhere.
It can't be stopped.
I like that you went for Dave Matthews, like little known 90s songwriter. Great.
Yeah, we think of oligarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I mean, Etienne's powers, being able to hear people's innermost thoughts, well, the tech companies kind of do have a degree of that power now. Our phones are the points at which we consecrate deposit our innermost thoughts, and people have access to that shit. It's well known. And so, yeah, actually, these people do exist in a very real sense. The people who have the level of power that Etienne has, although not mystical and not a will in the same way that he does, people do exist that have this level of power.
Yeah. And again, I think it is just so condensed to make for a way to tell a story more kind of directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this sense. Coming somewhat back to the comic rather than the grander things, one thing I did really like about Etienne specifically is more like actually the storytelling technique, visual storytelling. The first scene with him talking to Valentina, and they're talking about all this philosophical stuff, should they take over the world? Would it be right? That sort of thing. Who can stop who? There are bystanders walking by who, in the background, notice them and then look away with like a little weird symbol, kind of a faint symbol. And you look at that, like, I mean, at least I did, going like, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And then it kind of subtly reveals later that Etienne is making people forget that they saw them talking, because they are globally famous at this point already. And I really appreciate like showing the powers working in the background, and then explaining like what it is after the fact.
Yeah, because we don't see a lot of that in superhero stuff, do we?
No, and I really appreciate it in this way. Like, there's a lot of really overt, obvious storytelling, and there's a lot of subtle behind-the-scenes stuff as well. And I think the balance is really good here.
I also think, even though there's a lot of power creep in superhero stuff, we're obsessed with the origin story.
Yeah, and it does not barely do this at all.
No, so but what we see in origin stories is people coming into their powers. What we don't often see, other than in like supervillains for some reason, is people ably demonstrating their powers really casually. And that's exactly what that is, isn't it? Like, Etienne is existing in this world where he's instantly recognizable and incredibly famous, and making use of his powers so that people don't notice him, right? Whereas what we often see is
people kind of bumbling while they're learning them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because every time, even though these characters have existed for like 70 years, a lot of the time when we get a new Spider-Man run, we get his fucking origin story again.
And kind of the exception that proves the rule, we didn't get it with the latest Spider-Man, Tom Holland.
Yeah.
But the fact that we didn't get it is noteworthy because we had two really close to each other before that.
Yeah, exactly that. And so
people were like, oh, thank God we didn't see Uncle Ben get killed again. Like,
and so even though we get an origin story, we see people at the height of their powers, but just using them day to day. Because once a superhero gets to the height of their powers in a superhero arc, they're either saving the world or taking it over.
Yes.
They're either a supervillain taking over the world, or they're a superhero trying to stop them.
And normally, because they're the height of their powers, they don't have to like self-sacrifice and die, because for Marvel and DC, I don't think they quite get a handle on what if they were just godlike superpowered. How would they, we go about then? Like even Superman needs kryptonite just to remain interesting.
And Marvel doesn't really like just saying what would it actually look like if we had this person with omniscience or omnipresence existing in the world.
It's difficult to write, which is more of a credit to this than to slam Marvel or DC.
No, they've done it.
Yeah.
What they've given us is actually this is what happens when you have people with this level of power just existing in the world, right? And so it's distinct from the because I mean this is superhero shit. This is a superhero story. It just doesn't follow any of the conventions thereof. See, in the strictest sense, these are 6 superheroes.
I guess in a way, I think for me, I'm kind of on the fence on that term because for me, traditional superhero is very much here's a hero, here's a villain.
What, a masked adventurer?
Not even necessarily masked, but just a protagonist and an antagonist, but it's very much about right and wrong and that kind of thing. But
this is quite distinctly about right and wrong.
But more in superhero stuff, we have a good guy and a bad guy.
Yeah.
Who's the good guys, who's the bad guys in this? But the reason I'm on the fence is because on the other side, I would definitely call Watchmen a superhero. No, definitely not traditional superhero, but I'd call it a musing on superheroes, a kind of deconstruction of superheroes as a genre.
It's so interesting because it's hard to talk about the Watchmen in relation to superhero stuff now and think of it as separate. Because so much of what he did there has now become quite conventional in superhero stories.
Well, I wish more of it would, but I think it's kind of there's like false hollow copying of it, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you want like dark and edgy, well we'll put like all this stuff in, like violence and darkness and sexual violence and stuff like that. It's like, no, you're not getting it. Like he actually challenged the concept of superheroes as a concept itself. But what key with Watchmen is he went out of his way to have these characters at one point be crime-fighting vigilantes, which these characters never are.
No,
so
you're right.
That's why for me these ones feel even further away from the superhero concept than Watchmen, and I think that's why I'm not immediately jumping on board to call them superheroes,
because they're not interested in fighting crime; they're interested in mitigating loss,
and that's even only some of them.
Yeah, they're interested in mitigating the loss of life.
Yeah, the closest to a superhero is Valentina, who I think we need to get. We're past an hour. We've only talked about 2 of the 6. Although to be fair, one of them doesn't have that much to say about them.
Again, I think the conversation we've had has been more interesting.
Yeah, but
if I'm honest with you,
that's why it now naturally flows to Valentina because, like I say, I think she is the closest to the superhero archetype.
Yeah, she was the one that I got the least of a read on, really.
I agree with you that she is that because we know for a fact she's the least human, or at least one of the 2 least human. So all the other 4 of the 6 are human characters with abilities.
Yeah.
Valentina, as we're told fairly early on, is basically an angel, or maybe from a higher plane of existence. I
mean, we see her be born and then levitate and say, "I'm here to save you all."
Yes, but like what another guy, Magus, who he's the most knowledgeable about this whole world and everything. He describes her as she's basically from heaven. Not the Christian heaven, but it's just that heaven is the closest word we have for where she's from.
Yeah.
It's a higher plane of existence. There's also a lower plane of existence.
Yeah.
They're kind of heaven and hell. And also they make a specific note of saying, and we are on a one single timeline. So basically there's no time travel or anything. Like we get one shot at this. As powerful as we all are, no one can go back in time and redo stuff. And I think they made a very important note of that to be like, none of this Avengers stuff where they go back and fix everything.
Fuck you, Marvel!
Exactly, yeah. But I think
that's been Marvel's whole shtick for like 20 fucking years.
Yeah, and I think that raises the stakes a little bit as well. They're very powerful, they can do everything, but once something's done, it's permanent.
They have to get it right.
Exactly. So I think that was good
They're writing in ink here, not pencil.
Exactly. But and there's no tip out, tip X, there's none of that stuff.
Tip X.
Yeah, it's all gone. Someone sniffed it. So
that's the kind of school we went to.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah. So with Valentina, you say she's the hardest to get a read on, and I think that is intentional.
It's intentional.
She's a concept personified, and that concept does seem to be morality. May just makes a specific point of comparing her to Etienne. Yeah. It says Etienne is ethical, you're moral, you're not on the same side. And I think as soon as I read that, for me, not being as learned and not thinking about this stuff as much before now, I go, oh yeah, those are different things.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of, and I think for me and a lot of other readers who aren't into this stuff normally, what's so good about this book is that people will see, oh, superheroes, nuclear arms, like that's really interesting, and then be posed these questions they never thought about before.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good comic book in that sense.
Yeah.
So for me going, oh, morality and ethics is a different thing, and that kind of made me think about it for the first time. To me, in my base understanding, morality is your own personal code that if you share it with enough people, we call it good or moral or whatever. Whereas Etienne's ethics are, you may not like it, but I can prove on a bit of paper why it's the right thing to do.
Why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. But ethics can lead you to do really horrible things and justify it. Whereas morality, unfortunately, I think it can get you to a point on the other side where you can't act on certain things.
Well, I think it's the other way around.
Yeah,
I think ethics, like, I mean, ethics is interesting because actually there's only been an ethical practice in, like, the main place that we have ethical practice is in medicine.
Right.
Particularly psychology. You look at the shit they were doing pre-ethics in psychology, it's all fucking wild. They were torturing babies. They were actually just torturing babies before they had ethics in psychology. And so ethics is a deducible process by which you determine what is reasonable and safe to do to another human being or animal. Whereas a moral code is very individualistic. And it's something that can be warped. Like, people do all... a large group with a sense of morality have done shitty things in the world for a long time. What I think is really interesting is that actually Valentino's approach is more ethical, and what Etienne thinks of as ethics is actually his own personal moral code.
That's interesting. I think I disagree, but not in the sense of like, I think you're wrong. I think I take a different, I take away a different meaning from it all. I think to me, Valentine is moral because it's more derived from her feeling.
Yeah.
It's what she's doing what she feels is right or wrong in the moment, which is the most human thing, even though she's the least human of the six. Yeah. Whereas Etienne, it's not about what he feels. I mean, maybe the thing with Etienne is, like we said, it is how he feels, but he's not justifying it with feelings. He's justifying it with logic.
I think Etienne is just very good at articulating. Etienne is very good at articulating himself and making people around him believe that he's operating from a position of ethics, whereas actually he has his own personal moral code that he is passing off to people as ethics.
Yeah, as like I said earlier, he's not acknowledging his own bias.
It's moral relativism.
Yes. But with Valentina, I think she's very upfront about she's doing what she feels is right or wrong in the moment. And I think
with a higher success rate, I would argue.
Yes, but then is she affecting less change? Like, so the connecting thing, I think, between Etienne and Valentina, they seem to have known each other longest because they met like shortly after 1945. Also, Valentina was literally born at the moment of the atomic bomb, first atomic bomb going off, implying that she saw what humanity was about to achieve with the bomb and went, I need to get in there and
this is
balance
not
things
good.
out. Yeah, I need to like be a counteract to all this. So she's superpowered and sentient from birth. Like you say, she floated and said, I'm here to save you. The army were like, let's get her ready and weaponed up.
She was like nope.
Yeah, she was like, not having it.
She's cool.
And her and Etienne found each other. They were aware of each other from a very early, basically they were kids.
Yeah. And they're friends. Like they have the most enduring friendship out of anybody in the six.
Etienne specifically says, we need to be friends because we're the only people like us because they don't know about the other four yet. So it's interesting that she's like, hey, do you want to be friends? Like, oh, cool. Someone I get to be friends with because we're the same. And he's like, we have to be friends because we're the same.
You're the only person whose thoughts I can't hear.
Yeah.
It's the reason he gives for it.
And then later in the 60s when they're talking, the whole conversation is not only about what they should do with their powers, but also she's like, why are you telling me about this? Because if I don't like what you're saying, and then should I stop you? And he's like, that's why I'm talking to you about it. Because I need you on board because you could stop me. Yeah. And then we get a bit, and again, the difference between them, he makes the argument for why they shouldn't exist. And she's like, again, a very unhuman thing where she just kind of switches on a dime. It's like, okay, I'll kill you then. And gets really aggressive and her powers show. And the art, again, looks amazing.
It looks really good.
She's like an angelic Super Saiyan kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then he's like, oh, send something into her mind. It's like, by the way, this. And she goes, oh, shit. And it turns out he's got this thing in place where if he dies or he's gone or whatever, a bunch of people are going to die.
Yeah.
But even that's not 100%. It's like, do you believe I would do this?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, yeah, obviously. Like, I've met you. I know
you're
what
a bit
you're
fucking
like.
weird, dude.
Yeah. But maybe by this point, he hasn't killed as many people as we've seen him in the present. But so their whole thing is the checks and balances. It's, I won't do this. But I know you would stop me if I tried to do this, so we are at a kind of standstill, and that becomes the mutually assured destruction, the theme of the entire thing. Well, what's interesting as well is that Etienne seems to be the one who is maybe because he's the telepath, but he's constantly like, I'm about to do this, I'm about to speak to Heavy, he's gonna want me to do this, so I'm gonna have to do these things. Do I have everyone's permission to do it?
Yeah,
he's the one who's very much like he's instigating the checks and balances.
Well, he's
constantly.
The telepath.
Yes,
he can talk to all of them very quickly.
But they obviously have that
He's
agreement.
the only one with good phone service, you know?
The best phone service. You got the best phone service. But,
have you seen, there's this person on TikTok at the moment, and they've done a whole series, I think they're up to like 20 of them now, where it's what Donald Trump's policies sound like to them.
Right.
And there's one of them that just really gets me, where she goes, no more left-handed people. We're not doing left-handed people anymore. And it's just like, that's so But I don't know. It's 2025. I just don't know.
The modern white cis man just trying to be helpful. Like, I don't know. I just don't know.
I don't know. They is good. They works. They are like, they're not doing like a nailed on impression of him, but they're just catching enough of his vocal inflections that it's really good.
I think, unfortunately, I'm at the point where I've heard so many Trump impressions that I think I've
so many.
got bored them on now. Yeah, it's the best has ever been, best is the best phone service in the world, best you've ever seen.
I don't know that you're rounding your mouth out enough for it.
Probably not, but I can't be asked to put that much effort into it.
But yeah, no, Valentina's cool, and her relationship, Valentina, their relationship with Etienne is fun. In the interest of me just getting to talk about my favorite one, Magus.
Magus is really interesting. The only other thing I was going to say about Valentina is we do see that one bit of emotion and anger. Yeah. And it's the bit we were referencing earlier. She's dancing along at this Summer of Love thing in the 60s. She's topless, wearing jeans. She looks cool. She's just having fun. It turns out the government are like, she's going to be at this party, this little dance thing. Maybe we put a nuke under the deck and try and kill her. And they kill a bunch of people with her.
But not her.
Nope, because she's beyond human
she's fucking nuke proof.
Yeah. She goes straight to the White House.
Yeah.
And she kind of makes a point of being like, I'm not going to kill you, but you know I could.
Yeah.
Don't try this again.
Yeah.
Because I will. She doesn't even threaten to do it next time, but she's getting across like, you can't kill me. Look how easy I can get to you.
Yeah.
Don't do this again. And then Etienne, they're talking about it after the fact, and Etienne's like, yeah, you know everyone in that room died of radiation sickness like within a week or month afterwards.
She's like, well, I pissed out all the radiation a couple weeks later.
She literally pissed out afterwards. So even without trying, killed the people who she was angry at by just carrying the radiation like immediately to them. So I think there was a nice little like karma or something in there, which was fun. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting as well. It's the only time we really see her properly angry or anything. Most of the time she is fairly chill, fairly detached.
Yeah.
Which, going back to what you originally said, why I think it was hard to get a read on her.
Yes. I think that was intentional. I agree with you. So,
Magus.
So Magus
the Iron Man of the bunch, in a way.
So Magus he's the one who's British, isn't he?
Yes.
And so he started the pyramid, and he started it in sort of the late 70s in England with a bunch of punks. Yep. He just found all the punks and he was like, I like you guys because you're the punks who read and think. You're not the ones who just want to fight skins. Or they call them the fash.
Yeah.
Which was a nice... So one of the things, and now I know the guy who wrote it was British, I'm going to gush about it a bit less. He nailed it. He nailed the British slang. Magus, in my head, has like a London accent. He sounds really English. He didn't need to go into the whole thing where you like... try and denote an accent.
It's like, oi, blimey.
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
He just made him distinctly British. And that really made me happy because I love seeing English characters and things.
There was a fun point in the flashback where one of the punks, obviously not British, does a British accent.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, easy on the British accent. You're going a bit over the top of that. And then he does another impersonation of him after. He's like, all right, that was a bit better.
Yeah.
You nailed it a bit better.
I thought he was cool. The fact that he's now working with the American government is quite funny.
Well, the reason being, one thing that stands him out from everyone else is that he's the only he's non-powered in the same way that like Lex Luthor isn't superpowered.
Yeah.
He's got superpowered genius.
Yeah.
He can't physically do anything. He can't do telepathy like Etienne, but he's so intelligent, both in science, but also more specifically in the magic of this world.
He calls it the mystics, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he calls himself a magician or a mystic, and the pyramid is mystics and whatever. But he's also making weapons to combat the mystic and the powers and stuff.
Yeah.
He makes the laser for their government that they try and kill the heavy with.
Yeah.
And then later when he's like, all right, I'm joining you, the American government, because I think you have the structure to help me be the winning superpower.
Yeah.
But then you guys will be under my
jurisdiction.
At one point he's basically like, he kind of offers this, and they're like, well, you're British, so you can't be president. He's like, yeah, I'm obviously not going to be president. I am going to be in charge, but you know, someone else will be president and they'll listen to me. But he makes the laser, and someone else is like, well, if you're going to make these weapons, like, how are they going to be any better than the one that we tried to kill the heavy with and failed? And he's like, well, first off, it'll be me aiming it and not one of you fucks. Like, I'll actually do a good job. Like, I think his attitude is really much, it's so interesting that he's the furthest away from the other five, but also like maybe the biggest ego.
Yeah.
Like, he's even more of a control freak than Etienne, but then maybe he would be the same if he had Etienne's powers.
Yeah.
Like, he feels like that, you know, that whole like, how does Hawkeye stay in the event? Oh, no, more specifically, how does Batman operate in the Justice League with the people that he's fighting alongside? He is very much a making up for his shortcomings compared to the other five or the other six by being prepared, knowing the most. Like, he knows what people are going to do before they do it.
He's a good Boy Scout.
Yes, he's always prepared.
Just going back to like general comic book stuff, which you're going to love, because you love it when I do that.
I always love it.
You love it when I get on topic. He does swears, and they do the swears, Ryan.
They do the swears,
but like it's not like unnecessary swearing or particularly egregious. He swears about the amount that a normal British person swears, right?
Yeah.
Like,
it's not over the top.
It makes him believe. Like, if he didn't swear at all, I'd be like, is that guy even English?
It's not a Tom King character where, even though they're censored swears, there's like a swear every other word or every third word. He's selective when he uses it, but when he uses it, it's the similar amount to a real British person.
I don't think Americans know how to swear properly.
They've got different swears, and they
just don't do a very good job of it.
They don't use it enough.
We don't. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't even think we are the world leader in swearing.
Oh, no, it's the Australians.
It's the Australians, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
Maybe the Scottish.
Yeah, but if you can't understand them, like, do you know when they're swears?
That's mean. As somebody who has...
It's not true, though.
As somebody who would quite like to live in Scotland at some point soon, I just want all of our Scottish listeners to know that I have a deep respect for you, your culture, and your silly accents.
Glad we got that sorted enough off the table.
It's an important public forum for me to, levy for acceptance in a new nation.
Yeah, nation, not nation. It's all a bit complex, isn't it?
Scottish independence. I'm passionate about Scottish nationalism and Hawaiian nationalism.
So, back to Magus, because I think with him, like I say, he's kind of Batman-esque, he's Iron-esque. There's a really interesting point where him and the others were kind of living on this like floating house.
Yeah.
And they were kind of like a mini Justice League.
He made it.
Yeah. And it's weird how they were kind of all together because we see them just at odds all the time.
Yeah.
But it's also not so overt that it's like, these guys can't get along. Remember back when they were all friends and teammates? Like, it's not as obvious as that.
But there's a point where Etienne sends the journalist up to the heavy and he's like, I won't do it. And she's like, why? And he's like, I don't trust him. And she went, why do you trust him with me then? And he went, oh no, he's a good guy. But so much has gone on in our friendship now that our friendship has become untenable. But I still think the heavy's a decent guy, Like,
and that's Magus, he's so far removed from all of them, seemingly now.
Yeah.
But even then, there's a point where him and Valentina are talking, and that's where they have the ethics versus morals thing. and they're having it in a place. So Magus has all the capabilities to block Etienne. He wears a mask all the time for
very Doctor Doom.
Yeah, well, it's more the Magneto helmet, which is literally the Xavier thing. So he wears his mask all the time. He knows Etienne can't get to him, and then when he speaks to Valentina in a place where Etienne can't hear what they're saying, as soon as she gets out, Etienne's like, "What will we speak to Magus about?" Etienne hates not knowing things, and I love that Valentina's like, "We were just talking. It's not a secret," and he's like, well, you kept it a secret for me. And she's like, no, what we spoke about was secret. It wasn't a secret meeting.
Yeah.
We knew you knew we were meeting. We're just electing not to tell you what we talked about.
Yeah.
And he's like, I hate not knowing things.
Although surely as soon as she leaves his little protective sphere, he's going to know what they talked about because he can read her mind.
I don't think he can read Valentina's mind.
He can't read Valentina's mind, can he? No.
So at the surface thoughts, I think he says at one point, like if she's like says something in her head, he can like hear that, but she can't like specific thoughts. With Magus especially, we're talking a lot about like contradictions of these characters.
Yeah.
Magus, I think, is a real what's the old expression? A hat on a hat kind of, or no, hanging a lantern on it.
Yeah.
He's doing this whole thing with this cult. So back in the 60s when he didn't wear the helmet all the time. 70s. And he's talking about the cult, but he's also like, cults are fucking assholes, and if you run a cult, you're an arsehole. So like, well, aren't you an arsehole? It's like, well, yeah, exactly. Like,
we are the arseholes.
It's like, I'm trying not to be. It's like, if I ever do cult leader stuff, like, tell me, because or you got to kick me out or tell me. Or
he said, if one of you ever ends up sucking my dick, you need to sort that out.
But then with him, he's saying all this stuff, but I think it's more just him trying to appear self-aware. Because he's still doing the stuff. He's still leading a cult. He's still letting people into the innermost circle and telling them the secrets. And they are reliant on him as the leader of the cult and everything. So he's saying, like, cults are for assholes. If you lead a cult, you're an arsehole. It's like, all right, you're not stopped doing that, though.
This is a cult.
It's that kind of toxic trait of someone who's like, I know what I'm doing is bad and whatever. It's like, okay, are you going to make any efforts to stop doing it? It's like, no, but I'm aware of it, and it's not the bad stuff he's doing that's bad. It's in his eyes. It's that if he was unaware or unaware of his own shortcomings, that would be worse. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the fact that he's like, I know I'm an arsehole. Don't let me get too much of an arsehole. And then everyone's just like, yeah, you just keep doing it though. And I enjoyed that aspect of this whole world and these 6 characters. He's the one that's like, yeah, but I know I'm an arsehole, so that justifies it.
Yeah.
And I think that's so different. Like, Etienne's talking about ethics, the Heavy is very emotion based, Valentina's like moral, whatever, and he's like, I do shitty things, but at least I know they're shitty. Yeah. And like, he thinks that elevates him above all the others almost.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's separate to them because he isn't powered, you know?
But I think more maybe that's how he consciously thinks of it.
Yeah.
But I think on a subconscious level, he doesn't realize, he thinks he's elevated because he's self-aware.
Yeah.
But he's not acting any differently. He's still one of the 6 superpowers. He indirectly tried to kill one of them.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate like this flavor of these superpowered beings, if that makes sense.
We're not getting through all of them today, Ryan.
I mean, the only other one, no, sorry, 2, one is a demon we don't know about yet. We're in issue 6. We intentionally don't know anything about it yet.
We've met them a little bit, but not a lot.
I'm excited to find out, but we've definitely been under surface. The only other one is the Heavy.
And his son.
Yes, that's his. There was a little like example art like back one of the issues, and it was like a newspaper piece. So it's like, the future leader of the world may be a 14-year-old Limp Bizkit fan. Just a picture
he's
of
just
the
got
sun.
a spiky fire hair, hasn't he?
But
the Heavy's cool.
The Heavy is a leader of a weird sex cult, and in a kind of Magnus-esque fashion, he's like, we're open about the weird sex stuff. It's the secrets that we keep secret.
Yeah. I like him.
Yeah, he's a lot more, I think, the most emotionally based of the characters.
He's also the one whose motives kind of make the most sense to me.
Yeah, so one thing that's really underserved as a concept throughout all this is the fact that there are other superpowered people.
Yeah.
We only really hear about the 6 because they're the most powerful. And in a way, that kind of is a meaning in itself, where it's like, who cares about everyone else? The top 6 are all you need to be concerned about.
Because all of his group are all superpowered, aren't they?
Except Magus.
Yeah. Well, no, I meant...
Oh, the family of the Heavy, yes.
Yeah, the Heavy's family are all enhanced, aren't they?
Do you also see in one of the flashbacks, he's got a mustache and at one point like a handlebar mustache as well. But I think he's the most kind of like the atomics, as they're called, they're basically the mutants in this world. But like, we are all family. We need to care for each other. He's kind of a Magneto of the ones. He's
so high.
Yeah, he's a weird sex cult leader. So naturally smoking weed all the time. He uses his powers to levitate the joint in front of his mouth all the time.
So there's always a spliff that he's just ready to like snatch out of the air and have a drag on.
Exactly. He's again. I think he's an emotional one because I don't think he's really thinking through his. I mean, we see it when they're a team at one point, and they have that guy from the Americas who's like, we're going to do this Vietnam, and we're just letting you know. And then Majors is one who's like, though this is going to go really bad, I think we should fucking kill him, and reveals what he was going to do, the American government at that point, and Heavy just compresses him in a ball in a second. Like the fucking, was it the submarine thing?
Yeah.
A bit like that. But then Majors is like, yeah, I knew he was going to do it. And then Heavy's like, why didn't you fucking tell me? I hated that guy. Like, I wanted to kill him for ages. And Majors like, because I knew you wanted to kill him. Like, it was a bad idea to kill him before now.
Yeah.
Now it's a good idea. But Majors is Majors is the logical thinking, planning everything out. And the Heavy is like the emotional, like, I hated him. I wanted to kill him. And I'm mad at you because you
wouldn't let me
killing him for so long. And so the whole thing that starts off this main story is the Heavy turning up on America's doorstep with his floating city and just being like, here I am. Like,
fuck you guys.
But yeah, in a real kind of like, you can't do anything to me. I can be here. I'm not encroaching on your land. I'm just right on the edge and I could do whatever I want. And then bam, laser comes down and he pulls himself together. He's like, I'm going to launch Texas into orbit.
Yeah. I'm going to rip Texas from you, which is really funny because I think there's a lot of Texans who would quite like it if Texas got launched into orbit.
I mean, safely. If that could be a thing.
I reckon if you found a way to like cut Texas off America and just let it float into the Atlantic and be its own country, a lot of Texans would be like, yeah, cool.
I mean,
the Lone Star State.
That film that came out recently, Civil War, the plot of that, which I thought was kind of a smart thing, but also a bit fence-sitting, was the whole plot of that film is that California and Texas are seceding from America, but together. And I think they chose them to be like, we're not on left or right. This is about like independence from the larger and the fact that they are their own big economies themselves.
They've both made an attempt, haven't they?
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know how far those attempts have gone, but for the film, I think it was specific. It was those two states.
I think the Californian Republic lasted 17 days.
Well, good on them.
And then to
60
Texas,
more than I would have given them.
Yeah. And then Texas actually made a proper attempt to secede from the Union once, didn't they?
Yeah.
Early days, there wasn't that many stars on the flag at that point.
No, probably not. But yeah, the Heavy, I think, more the emotional based one, which I think is interesting compared to the others. And then there's the thing with the journalist, like you say, I think that really good like interaction. And then nice little reveal at the end because he trusts this journalist. He has sex with her because she's like, might be the end of the world, so let's bang. And he's like, I'm hurting from reconstructing myself,
but fuck it,
but I will get it up.
But I'm in a weird sex cult, so it's kind of my only thing.
I can use gravity.
There's no blood in there. I'm just holding it in suspension.
Still works though. But and the great bit as well.
You could make it stand up with gravity. Could you make it hard, though? That's the question.
I think you'd literally need to use gravity to force the blood into it, I think. I think that's the only way it could theoretically work.
I mean, yeah, because just like, if you just stop gravity acting upon it, it would just be like, things in the space station where they're just
loosely...
just kind of gently floating.
Imagine trying to eat a sausage hands-free in zero gravity.
I mean, it takes thumbing in a softie to a whole new level, doesn't it?
Yes. But with the Heavy, there was a flashback where America had their own superhero who was called like the Major or something. Yeah, basically Captain America.
Yeah,
I think it was funny. They were like, you think these guys are really powerful? We've got our own superhero, and he reflects American ideals, and he's going to defend us from these ones. And then Major tries to kill the Heavy, shoots him in the mid-range with a shotgun, and the thing happens first then, and then again years later with the laser, where Heavy just reforms himself using gravity, and he's like, are you fucking for real? And just kills this guy. So I thought that was right. But he's definitely always had a bee in his bonnet, I think, about the governments of the world, because they tried to kill him. Because he's the most like mass destruction kind of one of the six.
He's kind of the comedian without all of the awful stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, he's definitely not as nihilistic as the comedian. He's he's got the power. Maybe if he didn't have power, he'd be more nihilistic.
Yeah.
But because he's got this power, he's like, I'm going to make the world how I want it to be. And that's his floating city and his family. Yeah. I think he is that, maybe like the close, like communist level or like the cooperative kind
and
of.
And everyone else calls him a hippie, don't they?
Yes, exactly. Like, we're going to make our own society and we're going to be self-sufficient.
And there's going to be hookers and guns.
Yeah. But also with him, it's like, this wouldn't exist without your powers. Like, you're literally, you've created a singularity that's powering the city. So like, you it's only happening because you are alive and willing it to happen.
Yeah.
But I like that he's still got that same agreement with the other 6 or the other 5 when he's like, I will do this over here. It's not infringing on anything else. So none of you have to try and stop me. Yeah. But also, if you did, I think I could take you. Like, he's that kind of level.
I want to see him and Etienne fight.
Yeah. I mean, him and Valentina, I think, will be, for me, the big super... Because Etienne doesn't fight. I think he could just shut someone down.
That's why it would be so interesting.
I'd like to see what happens. I think the more epic fight would be him and Valentina. And I think he knows that because I think he's more wary of Valentina.
Everyone's cool with Valentina.
Yes.
Nobody gets in Valentina's way.
No, exactly. And then
nobody makes Valentina sit in a corner.
No. And then Mage is just like, I've designed a laser that the American government's going to try and kill you with. Don't tell anyone. Yeah, so that's the 6. I think for as long as we've gone on this episode, there's too much to talk about. And also, if you've listened to this episode without reading the comic, we've only talked about the first 6 issues. As of release now. There's like, I mean, if he does it, if Kieron Gillen does anything like Die, I think that went for like, off the top of my head, like at least 30 issues or something. There's so much more story.
This could easily run as long as The Walking Dead, I think.
Yeah, it depends how much juice they've got.
As good in its first 6 issues as The Walking Dead was.
Yeah, definitely. It's a completely different story, but I think it could engagement, just like wanting to see what happens next. I think it's definitely up there.
Yeah, I think that if Image are up for it and he's up for it, he could get 100 issues out of this without breaking a sweat.
I tell you what, this almost, in one aspect, this kind of comes very similar to me for Saga, where if they could make this into a kind of a visual medium like film, I think would be too limiting for this. TV would be better, but I think the budget alone to like present this without it looking cheap would be a lot.
TV's super trendy nowadays, though, isn't it?
Well, what I was going to say, animation, like Invincible. Yeah. I think this would be rife for a... Rife? Which is it? Ripe or rife? Ripe. I think this would be ripe, as I always knew, for an animation as big and bombastic as Invincible, but with this kind of story, and especially in this
but for
culture.
Grown-ups.
Yeah, but especially in this zeitgeist right now. I mean, it's why Kieron's writing it right now for this. But I think this would do really well as an animation.
It's very zeitgeisty, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely bring in the artist for like just to consult on the art, just to be like, how do you make it look like this? Like, how do we make it moving now? Like,
show me the settings on Photoshop.
Yes, exactly. We'll just copy and paste them into
Show me your Photoshop settings, sir.
Yeah, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna keep reading this.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe we'll come back to it like later in the year, and we can do like a catch up on it and give it the real like. This is the front runner for best non-superhero or something.
Well,
at the end of the year.
We've set a precedent recently where we do that, haven't we?
Yeah, and
to be honest with you, I think we've learned how to do a follow-up episode, because the first time we did it, we didn't have a fucking clue how to do it.
No, and to be fair, I think it was Scott Pilgrim, wasn't it? That was like the hardest one to do that with.
Yeah.
He was like, what's Scott doing now?
Because I would love to revisit the Pokemon manga now that we've done some more manga and have a really good conversation about that again. But it's just like...
Would we do a different generation rather than following on from where we left off?
Where we left off kind of gets into Gen 2.
Ah, fair enough. Oh, well, we got through a lot of it then, surprisingly.
Oh, how much did we read?
I don't know. We'll have to do the proper research, or we'll just do like the beginning of Gen 2 or something from there.
Yeah.
If we get another big Pokemon release, like presumably like another game or something at some point.
I reckon the next one will probably be on the Switch too.
Yeah.
I reckon they probably...
Be one of the first games.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine that they'll... Because we're now at the point in the cycle, I think the last games came out about 3 or 4 years ago. So we're now at the point where we're like due some more. But the next remakes are Gen 5, which are really hard to remake. Do you know much about the Pokemon franchise?
I knew a lot of the first generation, and then I fell off immediately.
So Gen 5 tried to be a new Gen 1. Gen 5 didn't have any Mons in it from the earlier generations. They gave us a whole new 150.
And then everyone went, we miss our favorites.
We want Pikachu and Gyarados.
This is literally the superhero thing of like, make it different. Not like that.
Yeah, exactly that. And so the remake that they need to do next is Gen 5, and I think that's going to be a bit of a bitch to remake. Because to capture that essence of Gen 5, it needs to not have any familiar faces in it. They're like, but Pikachu... Like, what is Pokemon if you can't catch a Pikachu?
Exactly, yeah. What is superheroes without Batman and Robin?
Yeah, this is it.
Basically same thing.
So yeah, I don't think we'll get any big Pokemon releases for the next... I don't know when the Switch 2 is penciled for.
Right, well, once we have a gap, that's our locked in the chamber, ready to go. We'll do another Pokemon episode.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what the numbers are like for that, as opposed to when it was our second ever episode, you know?
It was a weird thing to do for episode 2.
Yeah, well, we didn't know what we were doing. Some might argue we still don't now, but who's to say?
Very true.
I'll tell you one little bit of news, just to end on, which I think you'd appreciate. It was announced recently that Marvel and DC are doing some crossover titles this year.
No, I don't want it.
You don't want crossover titles?
No.
I thought that'd be up. I thought they'd be up your thing. You'd be like,
no, because there's one DC character that I'm interested in seeing.
You don't think they're going to be in it?
There's not going to be any Dick Grayson.
All right, I'll read it and then I'll tell you whether they're in it or not.
The only way you can compel me to review it, and I'm going to have to, aren't I?
We'll see. Maybe
if there's DC, if there's Marvel DC crossover content, we're going to have to cover it. Like, we can't not. But the only way I'm going to be excited about it is if there's a lot of Dick Grayson.
Or did you like Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes?
Yeah. If there's some Bucky Barnes, I like Bucky.
It's almost certainly going to be Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, Spider-Man. Like, I think it's going to be those top ones.
Because, like, if I got like a Bucky Barnes, Dick Grayson crossover,
like a road trip,
yeah, just them two,
each other's wingmen,
them two driving across the loneliest road in America, dicking some people down, like that would be really good fun.
And by dicking, he means Dick Grayson being a nice person to people.
Yeah,
that's what dicking means,
and eventually getting laid from it,
and that as well. So yeah, I think that's it. Now we've gone long, so I'll do you the service of not doing the call to actions this week.
Oh, I love it.
So I feel like it's gone like an hour 40 now, depending on how much gets edited in or left out or whatever. Yeah. So I think it'd be too much time to tell people to write in at comicclear@gmail.com and tell us what they thought of it. And
okay, you get one and we're done.
I mean, that wasn't technically one. I'm saying we don't have time to get into that.
Like, exactly.
The point I'm trying to get across
thank you
it
so
would
much.
Be too much time if we told people to go to the YouTube channel and like
you
it
need to stop.
Go on their podcast catches of choice and leave 5-star reviews.
It leaves a sour taste in my mouth every time we do this.
I agree with you. That's why I'm saying we don't have time to say.
And
all
the way you introduce it is worn out. It's a shtick, and it's a shtick, and you've beaten me with it for like 6 months.
I didn't realize you were so affected by me telling people they can also find TikTok videos under the Comic Literate name, and also my own videos on YouTube under Comic
Don't
Stan.
like it.
Well, if you don't like it, I won't do it then.
I don't like it. Makes me unhappy.
Maybe that's why it makes me happy. Anyway, on that note, thank you, goodbye.